The carriage wheels clattered against the cobblestones as Eliza Fairmont stared out the window at the passing London streets, her blue eyes brimming with unshed tears. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the elegant townhouses of Mayfair, but she took no comfort in their familiar beauty. Everything she had known, everything she had been, was being stripped away with each rotation of those merciless wheels. "You have made your choice, Eliza," her father had said just an hour before, his face carved from stone, his voice devoid of the warmth she had once known in childhood. "The Duke of Rothermere is a man of considerable wealth and influence. Your refusal to marry him is not merely disobedience, it is betrayal of your family, your name, your duty." "He is 40 years my senior, father," she had pleaded, her hands clasped before her. "His reputation, the way he treats his servants, the rumors about his first 2 wives." "Rumors!" Lord Fairmont had thundered, slamming his fist upon his desk. "You dare to reject a perfectly suitable match based on common gossip? I have indulged your romantic fancies for far too long. You are 20 years old, Eliza. Your sisters married well at 18. Your mother was 17 when we wed. And were you 43 and cruel?" The words had escaped before she could stop them. The silence that followed had been terrible. Her father's face had turned purple, then white, then settled into an expression of cold fury that chilled her to her bones. "Get out," he had said quietly. "Pack only what you can carry in one trunk. You have until sunset. If you will not honor your family, you are no longer part of it. You are disinherited, disowned, and will receive not 1 penny of your dowry or inheritance." Now, as the carriage deposited her at a modest boarding-house in Bloomsbury, paid for 1 week by her mother's tearful, secret contribution of her own jewelry money, Eliza felt the full weight of her decision. The landlady, Mrs. Pemberton, was kind but businesslike, showing her to a small room on the 3rd floor that contained a narrow bed, a washstand, a single chair, and a small wardrobe. "Rent is due every Friday, miss," Mrs. Pemberton said, her eyes taking in Eliza's fine dress and cultured bearing with obvious curiosity. "Breakfast is served at 7, dinner at 6. No gentlemen callers, no noise after 10. When the door clicked shut, Eliza sat on the bed and finally allowed herself to cry. Great, gasping sobs that shook her slender frame, tears that soaked into her lace handkerchief until it was useless. She had been brave in her father's study, defiant even, but now the reality crashed over her like a wave. She had no money, no prospects, no skills that would earn her a living. Young ladies of her station were trained in watercolors and piano, French and needlepoint, none of which would pay for a roof over her head. The week passed in a blur of anxiety and fruitless searching. She visited every respectable employment agency, answered advertisements for governesses and companions, but her lack of references proved an insurmountable obstacle. No one would hire a young woman, however well-spoken and educated, who had been cast out by her own family. The whispers followed her wherever she went, for scandal travelled swiftly through London society. On the 7th day, with her rent due the following morning and only 3 shillings remaining to her name, Eliza made a desperate decision. She had heard of a textile factory in Whitechapel that hired women with no questions asked. The wages were pittance, the conditions reportedly dreadful, but it was work. She would go there first thing in the morning and beg for any position they would give her. That evening, she decided to walk through the city one last time as the lady she had been. She put on her finest remaining dress, a gown of pale blue silk that matched her eyes, with delicate lace at the throat and cuffs. She arranged her golden hair in an elegant chignon and pinned her mother's pearl brooch at her collar. It was foolish vanity, perhaps, but she needed to remember, just once more, what it felt like to be Eliza Fairmont of Ashford Hall, before she became just another factory girl with rough hands and tired eyes. She walked through Bloomsbury as the gaslights flickered to life, casting pools of yellow light onto the pavement. The evening air was cool and tinged with coal smoke, and the streets bustled with people returning home from work. She wandered without destination, lost in melancholy thoughts, until she realized with a start that the sun had fully set and she had somehow ventured into an unfamiliar neighborhood. The streets here were narrower, darker, the buildings pressing close together like crooked teeth. The few people she passed looked at her with undisguised curiosity and something else, a predatory interest that made her quicken her pace. She had been foolish to wear such a fine dress, to display herself so obviously as someone who didn't belong here. "Lost, are we, sweetheart?" a voice called from a shadowy doorway. Eliza's heart hammered in her chest. She lifted her skirts and walked faster, her eyes searching desperately for a main street, a constable, anyone who might help her. But the narrow lane only seemed to grow darker, more twisted. "Where you off to in such a hurry?" Another voice, this one behind her. Footsteps quickened to match her own. She began to run, her breath coming in panicked gasps, but her fashionable boots with their small heels were not made for running, and her corset constricted her breathing. Within moments, rough hands grabbed her arms, spinning her around. 3 men surrounded her, their faces filthy and grinning, their eyes gleaming with malicious intent. "Pretty thing like you shouldn't be out alone," the tallest one said, his breath reeking of gin. His hand reached for her brooch. "Let's see what you've got worth taking." "Please," Eliza gasped, trying to pull away. "Please, I have nothing of value." "That's a lie," another man snarled, his fingers digging painfully into her wrist. "That dress alone would fetch a pretty price. And you, well, there's plenty who'd pay good money for a pretty blonde girl." Terror, pure and absolute, flooded through her. She opened her mouth to scream, but a dirty hand clamped over it, muffling her cry. She struggled wildly, kicking and twisting, but they were too strong, too many. They began dragging her toward a dark alley between 2 crumbling buildings. Then, like a bolt of lightning striking from a clear sky, everything changed. A figure appeared at the mouth of the alley, tall and powerful, moving with a speed and grace that seemed almost inhuman. Before Eliza could process what was happening, the hand over her mouth was gone, and the man who had held her was on the ground, clutching his stomach and gasping for air. "Let her go," a deep voice commanded, resonant with authority and barely controlled fury. The remaining 2 men released Eliza and turned to face this new threat. In the faint light from a distant street lamp, she saw her rescuer clearly for the first time, and her breath caught in her throat. He was magnificent. Tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and powerful arms that strained against the fabric of his simple linen shirt. His skin was deep brown, gleaming like polished mahogany in the lamplight, and his face was strikingly handsome, with high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and dark eyes that blazed with protective rage. His hair was close-cropped, and despite his workman's clothes, he carried himself with a dignity that commanded respect. "This ain't your business, boy," the tallest thug spat, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "Walk away." "I said, let her go," the man repeated, his voice dropping even lower, more dangerous. "I won't ask again." One of the thugs pulled out a knife, the blade catching the light. "Big talk for a—" He never finished the sentence. The dark-skinned man moved with blinding speed, disarming the attacker and sending him sprawling with a single, economical motion. The knife clattered harmlessly across the cobblestones. The third man, seeing his companions defeated, turned and fled into the darkness. Eliza stood frozen, her back pressed against the alley wall, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Her rescuer turned to her, his expression softening immediately, the fury draining from his features. "Are you hurt, miss?" he asked gently, his voice now warm with concern. He kept a respectful distance, as if aware that his size and the intensity of what had just happened might frighten her. No, I don't think so," Eliza managed, her voice shaking. She looked down at her wrists, which bore red marks from where the men had grabbed her, but nothing worse. "They didn't. You came in time. Can you walk? We need to get you somewhere safe. These streets aren't—" he paused, choosing his words carefully. "They're not safe for a lady at night." Eliza nodded and tried to take a step, but her legs, which had been holding her upright through sheer terror, suddenly buckled beneath her. Strong hands caught her before she fell, steadying her with a gentleness that seemed at odds with the violence she had just witnessed him capable of. "Easy now," he murmured. "You've had a shock. Let me help you." He kept one hand lightly on her elbow, supporting her without presuming too much familiarity, and guided her back toward the main street. As they walked, Eliza found her voice. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling entirely inadequate. "You saved my life. I don't know how to. I can never repay." "No repayment necessary, miss," he said firmly. "Any decent person would have done the same." "I'm not sure that's true," Eliza said quietly, thinking of all the people who had passed her by in doorways, who had looked the other way. "What's your name? I should at least know the name of the man who saved me." He hesitated, and she saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or wariness. "Samuel, miss. Samuel Morgan." "I'm Eliza," she said, then caught herself. "Eliza Fairmont." They had reached a wider street now, better lit and with more people about. Samuel looked around, his brow furrowed with concern. "Where were you headed, Miss Fairmont?" "I'll escort you home." Home. The word was like a knife to her heart. She had no home, not any more. Just a rented room for which she couldn't pay tomorrow's rent. "I'm staying in Bloomsbury," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "A boarding house on Russell Street." Samuel's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's quite a distance. And these aren't safe streets to cross at night, not for—" He stopped himself. "Not for someone like me?" Eliza finished, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. "No, I don't suppose they are. I was foolish to wander so far. I wasn't paying attention to where I was going." They walked in silence for a few moments, and Eliza was acutely aware of the picture they must present, a finely dressed white lady walking beside a black man in working clothes. People stared as they passed, some with mere curiosity, others with undisguised disapproval or hostility. Samuel seemed to feel it too, for he kept his eyes straight ahead and maintained a careful, respectful distance from her. "I apologize if my presence causes you embarrassment, miss," he said quietly. "But I can't in good conscience leave you to walk alone. Once we reach Bloomsbury, I'll make myself scarce." "Embarrassment." Eliza turned to look at him, genuinely shocked. "Mr. Morgan, you just saved me from—" She couldn't bring herself to say it. "I'm not embarrassed. I'm grateful beyond words." He glanced at her, and she saw surprise in his dark eyes, followed by something else, a warmth that made her heart skip unexpectedly. They walked on, and gradually Eliza felt her panic subsiding, replaced by an intense curiosity about this man who had appeared like a hero from a storybook. In the better light of the main streets, she could see him more clearly. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 25 or 26. His features were refined and intelligent, and there was something in his bearing that spoke of education and dignity, despite his humble clothing. "May I ask," she said hesitantly, "what brought you to that street at such an opportune moment?" Samuel's expression became guarded. "I was running an errand for my employer. The apothecary stays open late, and the one he prefers is in that district." "Your employer is fortunate to have someone so capable," Eliza said. "The way you moved, you've had training in boxing or some form of fighting?" A slight smile crossed his face. "My father taught me. He believed a man should be able to defend himself and those weaker than himself." "Your father sounds like a wise man." The smile faded. "He was. He died 3 years ago." "I'm sorry," Eliza said softly. "I lost my mother 2 years ago. The grief doesn't really lessen, does it? It just becomes familiar." Samuel looked at her with new understanding. "No, miss. It doesn't." They continued walking, and Eliza found herself telling him about her mother, how kind she had been, how she had loved roses and would spend hours in the garden. Samuel listened attentively, and then, slowly, began to share his own memories. His father had been educated, had taught him to read and write and calculate, had filled his head with ideas about dignity and justice and the rights of all men. "He was brought here as a slave," Samuel said quietly, the word heavy in the night air, "when he was just a boy. But he was freed when his master died, and he worked hard, saved every penny. He wanted to buy his family's freedom too, back in America, but," his voice caught slightly, "he died before he could save enough." "And you?" Eliza asked gently. "Were you born free?" "Yes, miss. In England, slavery is illegal. I was born free, but—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Freedom takes many forms. I work for a household in Belgravia. Good people, they treat me well. But I'm still property, in a way. Bought and paid for, expected to serve without question." Eliza felt a sharp pang of recognition. "Yes," she whispered. "I understand that more than you might think." Samuel looked at her curiously, and she found herself, to her own surprise, telling him everything. About the Duke of Rothermere and her father's fury. About her disinheritance and the boarding-house and tomorrow's rent that she couldn't pay. About the factory job she planned to take and how terrified she was of losing herself entirely in that life. The words poured out of her in a torrent, and Samuel listened without interruption, his face grave and thoughtful. When she finally fell silent, exhausted from the emotion of confession, he was quiet for a long moment. "You're very brave, Miss Fairmont," he said at last. "Not many people of your station would choose poverty over a comfortable marriage." "I'm not brave," Eliza said bitterly. "I'm terrified. And I'm beginning to think I was a fool. What is pride compared to having a roof over your head? What is freedom if you're starving?" "Everything," Samuel said fiercely, with such conviction that Eliza stopped walking and turned to look at him. "Pride is everything. Freedom is everything. Your father wanted to sell you, Miss Fairmont, as surely as if he'd put you on an auction block. You chose yourself instead. That's not foolish. That's courageous." Tears sprang to Eliza's eyes, and she blinked them back rapidly. No one had said anything like that to her. Her mother had cried and pleaded with her to reconsider. Her sisters had called her selfish and dramatic. The employment agents had looked at her with pity and condescension. But this man, this stranger who owed her nothing, saw what she had done and called it courage. "Thank you," she whispered. They had reached Russell Street, and Eliza pointed out Mrs. Pemberton's boarding-house. They stood awkwardly on the pavement, and Eliza was surprised to find she didn't want to say good-bye. In the hour they had walked together, she had felt more seen, more understood, than she had in months. "Will you be all right?" Samuel asked, concern evident in his voice. "Tomorrow, I mean when?" "I'll manage," Eliza said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "I always do." Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small drawstring purse. "Please take this. It's not much, but it might buy you another week, give you more time to find proper employment." Eliza stared at the purse, then at him. "I can't possibly. That's your money, Mr. Morgan. You earned it. And I can spare it," he said firmly. "Please, Miss Fairmont, let me help you." The pride in her wanted to refuse, but the practical terror of tomorrow morning made her reach out and take the purse. Their fingers brushed, and she felt a jolt of something electric pass between them. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I promise I'll repay you when I'm able." "There's no debt," Samuel said. His eyes held hers, and in the lamplight she could see warmth and something else, an interest, a connection that she felt mirrored in her own chest. "Perhaps," she said hesitantly, "if it wouldn't be too forward of me, would you call on me? I'd like to speak with you again. To thank you properly." Samuel's expression became pained. "Miss Fairmont, I don't think, a man in my position calling on a lady like yourself, people would talk. It could damage your reputation further." "My reputation is already in tatters," Eliza said with a bitter laugh. "And honestly, Mr. Morgan, I find I care less about what people think with each passing day. You've shown me more genuine kindness than anyone in my own social circle. I'd be honored to call you my friend." "Friend." She said the word, but even as it left her lips, she knew it was inadequate for what she was feeling. This stranger had saved her, yes, but more than that, he had seen her. Really seen her, in a way that no one in her privileged life ever had. Samuel looked torn, but finally nodded. "I have Sunday afternoons off. If you're certain." "I'm certain," Eliza said firmly. "Come at 3 o'clock. We can walk in the park, if the weather permits." She turned to go, then paused and looked back at him. In the lamplight, he looked like something from a dream, impossibly handsome, impossibly kind. Their eyes met, and she saw her own confused feelings reflected there. "Good night, Mr. Morgan," she said softly. "Good night, Miss Fairmont," he replied. "Stay safe." She watched him walk away until he disappeared into the night, then climbed the steps to the boarding-house, clutching the small purse he had given her. Inside, she counted the coins by candlelight. 5 shillings, more than a week's rent. Enough to buy her time. She lay awake for hours that night, her mind replaying every moment of their encounter. The strength of his hands catching her. The gentleness of his voice. The way he had called her brave. And most of all, that moment when their fingers had touched and she had felt something shift inside her, like a door opening onto a room she hadn't known existed. Sunday came with agonizing slowness. Eliza had found work in the interim, not at the factory, but as a seamstress for a dressmaker in Soho. The wages were meager and the hours long, but it was respectable work, and the dressmaker, a practical Frenchwoman named Madame Bouchard, asked no questions about Eliza's lack of references. At precisely 3 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, there was a knock at her door. Eliza, who had changed her dress 3 times and fretted over her hair for an hour, took a deep breath and opened it. Samuel stood in the hallway, looking uncomfortable and impossibly handsome in a clean white shirt and dark trousers. He held his cap in his hands and gave her a small, uncertain smile. "Miss Fairmont," he said, "I hope I'm not too early." "You're perfectly punctual," Eliza said, returning his smile. "Shall we walk?" They descended the stairs under Mrs. Pemberton's watchful and disapproving eye, and stepped out into a crisp autumn afternoon. The streets were busy with Sunday strollers, and Eliza was again conscious of the stares they attracted. But she lifted her chin and kept her eyes forward, her hand resting lightly on Samuel's offered arm. They walked to Russell Square and found a relatively quiet path beneath the trees. The leaves were turning gold and red, and the air smelled of autumn and possibility. "How are you managing?" Samuel asked once they were away from the crowds. "Did you find employment?" Eliza told him about Madame Bouchard and the dress shop, about the long hours bent over needlework until her fingers ached and her eyes watered. "But it's honest work," she said. "And Madame Bouchard is kind, in her way. She pretends not to notice when I eat the biscuits she leaves out for customers." Samuel's expression darkened. "You're not eating enough?" "I'm managing," Eliza said quickly. "The rent takes most of my wages, but I have enough for bread and cheese and tea. It's quite sufficient." "It's not sufficient," Samuel said firmly. "You're growing thin. I can see it in your face." Eliza looked away, embarrassed. "I'm fine, truly. And it's not your concern." "But it is," Samuel interrupted, then stopped himself. "Forgive me, miss. I have no right to speak so familiarly. But I do worry about you." They walked in silence for a moment, and Eliza felt her heart beating faster. "You may speak as familiarly as you like, Samuel," she said quietly. "I consider you a friend. Perhaps the only real friend I have in London now." Samuel looked at her, and she saw in his eyes that he felt it too, this connection that had formed between them, this bond that grew stronger each time they spoke. "Tell me about your family," Eliza said, partly to break the tension and partly because she genuinely wanted to know. "You mentioned your father, but what about your mother?" Samuel's face softened. "She died when I was born. My father never remarried. He said he could never find another woman who matched her spirit. He kept one portrait of her, painted before they were separated. I still have it. Will you show it to me someday?" Eliza asked. "Someday," Samuel agreed. "Though I doubt you'd want to come to my lodgings. I share a room above a bakery with 2 other men who work in the household. It's not a place for a lady." "I'm not so much of a lady any more," Eliza said with a wry smile. "Just a working girl trying to make her way in the world. Not so different from you." "Very different," Samuel said seriously. "You were born to grace and beauty and comfort. I was born to," he paused, "to be useful, to serve." "Is that what you want?" Eliza asked. "To spend your life serving others?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "What I want and what is possible are 2 very different things, Miss Fairmont." "Eliza," she corrected. "Please call me Eliza." He shook his head. "I can't. It wouldn't be proper." "Proper," Eliza laughed, "but there was pain in it. Proper dictated that I marry a cruel old man for his title and wealth. Proper says we shouldn't even be speaking to each other. Perhaps proper is precisely what we should ignore." Samuel stopped walking and turned to face her. "Do you understand what you're saying? The risk you're taking? If anyone from your former circle sees you with me, walking like this, speaking like this, your chances of ever returning to that life will be destroyed completely." "Good," Eliza said fiercely. "I don't want to return to that life. I don't want to be the girl who paints watercolors and plays piano and says nothing of consequence while men discuss my value like I'm a horse at auction. I want to be someone real. Someone who makes her own choices, even if they're hard ones." Samuel stared at her, and she saw admiration in his eyes, mixed with something deeper, something that made her breath catch. "You are extraordinary," he said softly. They stood there beneath the golden leaves, the world moving around them, but in that moment Eliza felt as though they were the only 2 people in existence. She wanted to reach out and touch his face, to close the distance between them, but she held back, uncertain. "I should walk you back," Samuel said reluctantly. "It's getting late." They returned to the boarding-house slowly, neither wanting the afternoon to end. At her door Samuel took her hand gently, the first time he had done so, and bowed over it with natural grace. "May I see you again?" he asked. "Next Sunday." "Yes," Eliza said, not caring how eager she sounded. "Yes, please." The weeks that followed developed a rhythm. Every Sunday afternoon Samuel would call for her, and they would walk through the parks and squares of London, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about the books his father had taught him to read, Shakespeare and Donne and Milton. She recited poetry she had memorized as a girl and was delighted to find he knew many of the same verses. They discussed philosophy and politics, religion and science. Samuel had a keen, educated mind that had been starved for intellectual conversation, and Eliza found herself challenged and stimulated in ways she had never been in her father's drawing-room. He disagreed with her, debated with her, made her defend her positions and think more deeply about her beliefs. And with each passing week, Eliza felt herself falling deeper into something she was afraid to name. It wasn't just his beauty, though she had never seen a more handsome man. It wasn't just his kindness, though he was unfailingly gentle and considerate. It was the way he saw her, really saw her, and valued her mind, her opinions, her very self. With Samuel, she wasn't Lady Eliza Fairmont of Ashford Hall, or the disobedient daughter, or the fallen woman. She was simply Eliza, and that was enough. The first time he smiled at her, really smiled, with genuine joy lighting his face, her heart had stuttered in her chest. The first time he laughed at something she said, a rich, warm sound that seemed to come from deep in his chest, she had wanted to hear nothing else for the rest of her life. And the first time their hands had brushed accidentally while walking, and he had taken hers deliberately and held it, their fingers intertwined, she had known with absolute certainty that she was in love with him. It was impossible, forbidden, fraught with danger and difficulty. Society would never accept them. Her family would be scandalized beyond redemption. Samuel could lose his position, or worse. But Eliza found she didn't care. She had already lost everything that society said should matter to her, and discovered she was still whole, still capable of joy. And Samuel, reserved, cautious Samuel, was beginning to show signs that he felt the same. One cold November afternoon, they walked along the Thames, watching the boats navigate the grey water. Samuel had been quieter than usual, and Eliza sensed something weighing on his mind. "What's troubling you?" she asked gently. He was silent for a long moment, then said, "My employer is relocating to the country after Christmas. To his estate in Derbyshire. He's asked me to accompany him." Eliza's heart plummeted. "Derbyshire? But that's so far." "Nearly 200 miles, Samuel confirmed. "I would be gone for at least 6 months, possibly longer." "And if you refuse?" "He would dismiss me, without references. I'd have a hard time finding another position." They walked on in heavy silence. The thought of not seeing Samuel for 6 months, or longer, was unbearable. The thought of not seeing him at all, ever again, was worse. "Perhaps," Eliza said carefully, "perhaps it's for the best. What we're doing, this friendship, it's dangerous for both of us. You could lose everything, Samuel. Your position, your reputation, even your safety." "Is that what you want?" Samuel asked, his voice strained. "For me to go?" "No," Eliza said truthfully. "But what I want and what is wise are clearly two different things." Samuel stopped walking and turned to face her. His dark eyes were intense, searching her face. "Eliza," he said, and it was the first time he had used her Christian name, "I need to know something. This friendship we have, is that all it is to you?" Her heart pounded. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean," he said quietly. "I've tried to be proper, to maintain appropriate distance, but every week it grows harder. Every time I see you, every time I hear your voice, every time you smile at me—" He broke off, his jaw clenching. "I'm in love with you. I know I have no right to say that. I know it's presumptuous and impossible, but it's the truth." Eliza felt tears spring to her eyes. "Oh, Samuel, I've loved you for weeks. I tried not to. I told myself it was impossible, but I can't help it. I love you." The world seemed to hold its breath. Then Samuel took her hand and drew her away from the main path, behind a large oak tree that screened them from passers-by. His hands came up to cup her face with infinite gentleness. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Please," she whispered. His lips met hers softly, reverently, as though she were made of porcelain and might shatter. But Eliza pressed closer, her hands gripping his shoulders, and the kiss deepened. It was nothing like the chaste pecks she had received from awkward suitors at balls. This was fire and sweetness and belonging, a promise made without words. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "What are we going to do?" he asked. "This is It's impossible. There's no future for us, Eliza. Even if I could support you properly, society would never accept it. You would be shunned completely. And his voice broke slightly, I could be killed for touching you this way. I know, Eliza said, tears streaming down her face. I know all of that. But I also know that I would rather have one moment of real love with you than a lifetime of comfortable emptiness with someone else. You might feel differently when the reality sets in, Samuel said. When you're facing real persecution, real hardship. I'm already facing hardship, Eliza reminded him. I'm already shunned by society. What more can they do to me? And as for persecution, we'll face it together. Samuel kissed her again, desperately this time, as though trying to memorize the taste and feel of her. I don't want to go to Derbyshire, he said against her lips. I don't want to leave you. Then don't, Eliza said simply. Stay. We'll find a way to manage. Without a position? Eliza, be reasonable. I'm tired of being reasonable, she said fiercely. Reasonable would have had me married to the Duke of Rothermere by now, miserable and trapped. You taught me that freedom matters more than comfort. Well, I'm free now, and I choose you. I choose this, whatever the consequences. Samuel looked at her with wonder and terror in equal measure. You're suggesting that I throw away my livelihood, risk everything for love, Eliza finished. Yes, that's exactly what I'm suggesting. Is that so terrible? He laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and despair. It's mad. It's absolutely mad. Then be mad with me, Eliza said, taking his hands in hers. Samuel, I know this is frightening. God knows I'm terrified. But I also know that if I let you go, if I let you leave for Derbyshire, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me. You see me, truly see me, in a way no one else ever has. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you. Samuel closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. Eliza, you beautiful, stubborn, impossible woman. You're asking me to believe in fairy tales. I'm asking you to believe in us, she corrected. There's a difference. He kissed her once more, tenderly, and when he pulled back, she saw that he had made his decision. I'll tell my employer tomorrow that I won't be accompanying him to Derbyshire, Samuel said. I'll find other work here in London. It won't be easy, and we'll have to be careful, but, he smiled, and it transformed his face, I love you too much to leave you. They held each other there beneath the oak tree as the sun set over the Thames, two souls who had found each other against all odds and refused to let go. The weeks before Christmas were difficult. Samuel left his position, and despite his skills and education, found that doors closed quickly when potential employers learned he had left his previous post to remain in London. The unspoken question hung in the air. What reason could a black servant have for refusing a good position unless there was something improper going on? He took whatever work he could find, loading crates at the docks, sweeping floors in a printing house, running errands for shopkeepers. The wages were unpredictable and meager, barely enough to pay for his lodgings and food. But every Sunday he came to see Eliza, and despite the hardship, he never once expressed regret for his choice. Eliza, meanwhile, had been promoted at Madame Bouchard's shop. Her fine needlework and eye for detail had not gone unnoticed, and the dressmaker now entrusted her with more complex alterations and even some original designs. The additional income helped, though she and Samuel both lived on the knife's edge of poverty, never more than a week's wages away from destitution. They met when they could, always careful, always mindful of prying eyes. London was vast, but scandal travelled on swift wings, and they could not afford to draw attention. They walked in the less fashionable parks, met in quiet tea-shops where working people gathered, spoke in hushed voices about their dreams for a future that seemed impossibly far away. One particularly cold December evening, as snow began to fall over London, Samuel arrived at Eliza's boarding house with a small package wrapped in brown paper and string. "What's this?" Eliza asked, taking it with surprise. "Christmas is in 3 days," Samuel said, looking almost shy. "I wanted you to have something." Eliza unwrapped the package carefully and gasped. Inside was a beautiful shawl of deep blue wool, soft as a cloud, with delicate embroidery at the edges. "Samuel, this is too much. You can't afford—" "I made it," he interrupted. "Well, mostly. I bought the wool and thread with money I'd been saving, and a woman at the boarding house taught me the basic stitches. The embroidery took me 3 weeks. It's not very good, I'm afraid, but—" "It's perfect," Eliza whispered, tears streaming down her face. She wrapped the shawl around her shoulders and felt enveloped in warmth and love. "No one has ever made me anything before. Thank you, Samuel. Thank you." She reached into her own pocket and pulled out a small parcel. "I have something for you as well." Samuel opened it to find a leather wallet, beautifully made, with his initials embossed on the front. "I made it during my lunch hours at the shop," Eliza explained. "Madame Bouchard has a friend who does leather work, and he taught me. I thought, well, when you find a proper position again, you'll need something respectable to keep your papers in." Samuel ran his fingers over the smooth leather, his eyes bright with emotion. "It's beautiful. I'll treasure it always." They stood there in the drafty hallway of the boarding house, holding their gifts, looking at each other with such naked love that Mrs. Pemberton, who was watching from her parlor door, felt her stern heart soften despite her disapproval. "You should come inside," she said gruffly, startling them both. "It's too cold to stand about in the hall. There's tea in the parlor." Eliza and Samuel exchanged surprised glances, but followed the landlady into her private sitting-room. It was a comfortable space, warm from the fire, with worn but clean furniture and dozens of photographs on the mantelpiece. Mrs. Pemberton poured tea with brisk efficiency and handed them each a cup. Then she sat down and fixed them with a stern look. "I've been running this boarding house for 30 years, she said. "And in that time, I've seen all manner of situations. I've kept my peace about your Sunday visits, young man, because Miss Fairmont is a good tenant who pays her rent on time and causes no trouble. But I'm not blind." Eliza felt her face flush with shame. "Mrs. Pemberton, I assure you, we've done nothing improper." The landlady held up a hand. "I'm not accusing you of impropriety. What I am saying is that you're playing a dangerous game. The world is not kind to those who step outside its boundaries, and you two have crossed more boundaries than most." "We love each other," Samuel said quietly, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. "I know it's not what society expects, but—" "Society be damned," Mrs. Pemberton said bluntly, shocking them both. "My late husband was a sailor from Jamaica. When we married, my family disowned me. The neighbors spat at us in the street. I lost every friend I had. But we had 25 years together before the fever took him, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." She stood and walked to the mantelpiece, picking up one of the photographs. "This is Thomas," she said, showing them a portrait of a handsome black man in a sailor's uniform. "Best man I ever knew. Never regretted a day with him, despite all the hardship." She set the photograph down gently and turned back to them. "What I'm trying to tell you is this. If you're going to do this, if you're going to build a life together, you need to be smart about it. You need to have a plan. Love is wonderful, but it doesn't put food on the table or keep the landlord from evicting you." "What would you suggest?" Eliza asked, leaning forward. Mrs. Pemberton sat back down and looked at them thoughtfully. "First, you need steady income. Young man, what skills do you have besides whatever position you left?" "I can read and write and calculate," Samuel said. "My father taught me well. I've done bookkeeping, inventory management, correspondence. And I'm strong. I can do physical labor when needed. Can you teach? Mrs. Pemberton asked. Samuel blinked. I suppose so. I've never tried, but— There's a school for working children in Whitechapel, the landlady said. Run by Quakers. They're always looking for teachers, and they care more about ability than background. They might hire you. Hope flickered in Samuel's eyes. Do you really think? I think it's worth trying, Mrs. Pemberton said firmly. And you, Miss Fairmont, you're wasted doing simple alterations. With your eye for design and your breeding, you could be doing much more at that dress shop. Madame Bouchard has been kind to give me any work at all, Eliza said. I don't want to seem ungrateful. There's a difference between gratitude and selling yourself short, Mrs. Pemberton interrupted. Talk to her. Show her some original designs. Make yourself invaluable. Then, when the time is right, you negotiate for better wages. She stood, indicating the conversation was over. One more thing. You'll need to leave London eventually. This city has too many eyes, too much talk. Save everything you can. In a year or two, you'll have enough to move somewhere smaller, somewhere you can start fresh where no one knows your history. At the door, she paused and looked at them with something almost like warmth. You remind me of Thomas and me, when we were young and foolish and brave. The road ahead won't be easy, but if you're determined, you'll make it. Just be smart. Be careful. And for God's sake, don't do anything stupid that will get you killed or arrested. After Samuel left that evening, Eliza lay awake in her small room, wrapped in her new shawl, thinking about Mrs. Pemberton's words. The landlady had given them something precious, not just advice, but hope. The idea that their love, impossible as it seemed, might actually have a future. Samuel took Mrs. Pemberton's advice and presented himself at the Quaker school in early January. The headmaster, a gentle-faced man named Mr. Bartlett, interviewed him extensively, testing his knowledge of reading, writing, arithmetic, and history. Samuel answered every question with confidence, his father's careful education proving its worth. "You're more than qualified," Mr. Bartlett said finally. "But I must be honest with you, Mr. Morgan. Some of the parents may object to having a black teacher instruct their children. I will support you fully, but you should be prepared for resistance." "I'm used to resistance, sir," Samuel said quietly. "I won't let it interfere with my work." He was hired at a modest but steady salary, and began teaching a class of 30 children aged 8 to 12. The work was challenging. Many of the students came from desperately poor families and had never held a book before, but Samuel discovered he had a gift for teaching. He was patient and kind, firm but never cruel, and he made learning feel like an adventure rather than a chore. Some parents did complain, as Mr. Bartlett had warned. But when their children came home excited about their lessons, reading aloud from primers and solving sums with pride, the complaints gradually faded. By spring, Samuel had earned the respect of most of the school community. Meanwhile, Eliza followed Mrs. Pemberton's advice and approached Madame Bouchard with a portfolio of original dress designs. The Frenchwoman studied them carefully, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "These are good," she said finally. "Very good. You have talent, Mademoiselle Fairmont. Real talent. Why have you been hiding it? I didn't know if— I wasn't sure if you would. If I would take you seriously?" Madame Bouchard's lips quirked. "I am a businesswoman. I take talent seriously, wherever I find it. You will design for me, and I will pay you more. But," she held up a warning finger, "you will work harder than you have ever worked. I demand perfection." Eliza's new designs proved popular with Madame Bouchard's clientele. Women who wanted something unique, something that set them apart from the standard fashions, sought out the mysterious designer whose work bore a distinctive style. Elegant but unconventional, beautiful but practical. Madame Bouchard was shrewd enough not to reveal that her talented designer was a fallen gentlewoman, letting the mystery add to the allure. With both of them earning steady incomes, Eliza and Samuel began to save. Every spare penny went into a small tin box that Eliza kept hidden under a loose floorboard in her room. It was painfully slow. Rent and food took most of their wages, but the box gradually grew heavier. They still met every Sunday, but now they also stole moments during the week. Samuel would walk Eliza home from the dress shop, and they would take the long route, talking and laughing, their hands occasionally brushing. Once or twice, when they were sure no one was watching, he would pull her into a doorway and kiss her, quick and sweet, before hurrying on. Spring turned to summer, and their love deepened. They knew each other's thoughts, finished each other's sentences, found joy in simple pleasures, a shared apple, a joke that only they understood, the way sunlight caught in each other's eyes. One warm July evening, Samuel asked Eliza to walk with him to a part of London she had never seen before. They traveled far to the east, to a neighborhood of modest houses with small gardens. Samuel stopped in front of one particularly neat cottage with white-painted shutters and roses growing by the door. "What do you think?" he asked nervously. "It's lovely," Eliza said, confused. "But why are we?" "It's for rent," Samuel interrupted. 2 rooms downstairs, 2 rooms upstairs, and a small garden. The landlord is a Quaker, a friend of Mr. Bartlett's. He's willing to rent to us. To me, I mean, and—" he took a deep breath, "and my wife." Eliza's heart stopped. "Your wife?" Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a simple gold ring. "I know we can't marry in a church," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "No priest or minister would perform the ceremony. But there are magistrates who will. It won't be recognized by society, and your family will never acknowledge it, but in the eyes of the law, we would be husband and wife." He dropped to one knee right there on the street, holding up the ring. "Eliza Fairmont, will you marry me? Will you share this little house with me, and build a life with me, despite all the obstacles we'll face?" Tears streamed down Eliza's face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Samuel, yes." He stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, and kissed her there on the street, not caring who might see. When they finally broke apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. "When?" Eliza asked. "When can we?" "As soon as you like," Samuel said. "I've saved enough for the first month's rent and the marriage fee. We could go to the magistrate tomorrow, if you want." "Tomorrow," Eliza agreed, her heart soaring. "Yes, let's do it tomorrow." They were married the next day in a sparse office that smelled of ink and old paper. The magistrate was an elderly man who looked at them with mild curiosity, but asked no questions beyond the required legalities. Mrs. Pemberton and Mr. Bartlett served as witnesses, both beaming with approval. When the magistrate pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed Eliza tenderly, and she felt as though her heart might burst with joy. She was married. Against all odds, against all expectations, she had married the man she loved. They moved into the little cottage that same week. It was sparsely furnished, a bed that Samuel had bought second-hand, a table and 2 chairs, a cooking stove, some basic dishes and linens, but to Eliza it was a palace. It was theirs. Their home, their sanctuary, their future. That first night, after they had unpacked their few belongings and eaten a simple dinner of bread and cheese, they sat together in the small parlor, watching the last light fade from the sky. "Are you happy?" Samuel asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Happier than I've ever been in my life," Eliza said truthfully. "I know we'll face difficulties. I know people will judge us and say cruel things. But I don't care. I have you, and that's all that matters." Samuel pulled her closer and kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Mrs. Morgan." "I love you too, Mr. Morgan," she replied, and they sat there in the gathering darkness, two souls who had found each other against impossible odds and refused to let go. The months that followed were not without challenges. Their neighbors, once they realized the nature of the relationship, were cold and sometimes hostile. Children threw stones at their windows. Someone painted ugly words on their door. Eliza overheard whispered conversations when she went to market, saw the way shopkeepers served her with barely concealed disgust. But they also found unexpected allies. Mr. Bartlett and his Quaker community welcomed them warmly, inviting them to meetings and social gatherings. Madame Bouchard, when she learned of the marriage, raised Eliza's wages without comment. And Mrs. Pemberton became a regular visitor, bringing small gifts and offering advice drawn from her own experience. Samuel's students adored him, and several of the parents, grateful for the education their children were receiving, began to defend him against critics. Slowly, grudgingly, a few neighbors began to nod in greeting when they passed on the street. Eliza continued to design for Madame Bouchard, and her work grew more accomplished with each passing month. She created gowns that were talked about in fashionable circles, though few knew who had designed them. The money she earned, combined with Samuel's teaching salary, allowed them to live modestly but comfortably. They planted vegetables in their small garden and ate meals they had grown themselves. Samuel taught Eliza to cook, and she taught him to sketch. In the evenings, they read aloud to each other from borrowed books, or simply talked, sharing their thoughts and dreams. And at night, in the privacy of their bedroom, they loved each other with a passion and tenderness that grew deeper with familiarity. Eliza had never imagined that marriage could be like this, a partnership of equals, based on respect and genuine affection rather than duty and obligation. One evening in early autumn, as they sat in their parlor after dinner, Eliza placed a hand on her stomach and looked at Samuel with a mixture of joy and fear. "I have something to tell you," she said quietly. Samuel looked up from the student papers he was grading, concern flickering across his face. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant," Eliza said. "I'm quite certain." The papers fell from Samuel's hands. He stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, the most beautiful smile Eliza had ever seen. "A child," he whispered. "We're going to have a child." He crossed to her and knelt beside her chair, placing his hand over hers on her stomach. "Are you frightened?" "Terrified," Eliza admitted. "But also, Samuel, I'm so happy. I know it will be difficult for our child, growing up with parents like us. But we'll love them so much. We'll teach them to be strong and proud and kind." "Like their mother," Samuel said, kissing her gently. The baby came in the spring, a girl with her mother's blonde hair and her father's dark eyes. They named her Hope, because that was what she represented to them. Hope that love could overcome prejudice, that families could be built on choice rather than convention, that the future might be kinder than the past. Eliza held her daughter for the first time and wept with joy. All the hardship, all the struggle, all the judgment, it was worth it for this perfect, beautiful child who looked up at her with curious, trusting eyes. Samuel stood beside the bed, his hand on Eliza's shoulder, looking down at his wife and daughter with an expression of such profound love and gratitude that Eliza's heart ached. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for choosing me. For choosing this life." "I would choose it again," Eliza said firmly. "Every day I would choose it again." Years passed. Hope grew into a bright, spirited child who had her father's intelligence and her mother's determination. Samuel continued teaching, eventually becoming headmaster of the school. Eliza's designs became sought after by women who valued originality over convention, and she eventually opened her own small shop. They never became wealthy or socially prominent. They faced prejudice and hardship throughout their lives. But they also knew joy and love and the satisfaction of building something real together. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Eliza would think back to that night when she had been attacked in the dark streets of London, when a beautiful stranger had saved her life. She would remember the girl she had been, privileged and sheltered and terrified of the future. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who had chosen love over comfort, courage over convention, freedom over security. A woman who had found her true home not in a grand estate, but in a modest cottage with a man who saw her and cherished her for exactly who she was. And when Samuel would catch her with that faraway look in her eyes, he would pull her close and ask what she was thinking. "I was thinking," Eliza would say, "that I am the luckiest woman in the world." And Samuel, holding her close, would reply, "No, my love, I am the one who is blessed. Every day with you is a gift I never thought I would receive." Their love story was not one that would be told in drawing-rooms or celebrated in society pages. But it was real and true and enduring, a testament to the power of two souls who found each other in darkness and chose to walk together into the light, no matter what obstacles stood in their way. And that, Eliza often thought, was the only kind of love story worth having.